For decades, older Americans have been told, "Drink milk, it's good for your bones." But what if that advice is not only outdated, but dangerous? New research reveals that without a little-known vitamin, K2, calcium from milk may end up in all the wrong places: arteries, kidneys, even joints. The result? More stiffness, not strength. More risk, not resilience. If you're over 60 and still relying on milk alone, it may be time to rethink everything you thought you knew about bone health. For older adults, calcium is essential, but only when it goes to the right place, explains Dr. Grace Mitchell, a geriatric nutrition specialist. Without vitamin K2, much of it can end up hardening arteries instead of strengthening bones. For years, milk has been promoted as the go-to source of calcium for seniors. But while it delivers calcium, it lacks the vital nutrient that tells calcium where to go. That nutrient is vitamin K2. It activates proteins that help deposit calcium into bones and teeth, while keeping it out of blood vessels, kidneys, and joints. This article explores why seniors over 60 should reconsider milk as their primary calcium source and instead look to a smarter combination: calcium paired with K2. We'll follow one woman's journey from joint pain and fatigue to renewed mobility, simply by changing how she thought about bone health. If you drink milk daily, what you learn next may surprise you. Margaret Sanders, 67, had always believed she was doing everything right for her bones. Ever since her early 50s, she followed her doctor's basic advice: take calcium and drink milk. A glass at breakfast, a glass with dinner, plus a calcium chewable before bed. Strong bones, strong life, she used to say with confidence. But by her mid-60s, Margaret began noticing things that didn't quite add up. Her knees ached on the stairs, and not from arthritis. She tripped more often, not because of clumsiness, but because her balance was fading. Her dentist mentioned early signs of jawbone thinning, and during a routine scan, doctors found trace calcifications in her kidneys. The most confusing part? Her bone density test showed only minimal improvement, despite nearly 2 decades of high calcium intake. "I don't understand," she told her daughter. "I've done what they told me. I've taken the calcium. I drink milk every day. Why do I feel weaker?" Her daughter, a registered dietitian, decided to take a closer look. She asked Margaret to list all her supplements and dietary habits. When they sat down, one glaring omission appeared: no vitamin K2. Margaret had never even heard of it. That same day, her daughter pulled up clinical studies showing how calcium, when taken without vitamin K2, could accumulate in soft tissues rather than being directed into bones. The result? Calcium in arteries, not femurs. In joints, not vertebrae. She explained that K2 activates a protein called osteocalcin, which binds calcium to bone, and another called matrix G-late protein, which prevents it from settling in arteries. Suddenly, Margaret's strange symptoms began to make sense. What she thought was bone protection had become a silent threat to her overall health. That night, she poured herself what she decided would be her last daily glass of milk. It wasn't that milk was bad, but she now knew that calcium alone wasn't the answer. Without vitamin K2, she had unknowingly allowed calcium to wander, and her body was paying the price. Her journey towards stronger bones wasn't over. In fact, it was finally about to begin, just from a different, smarter place. After discovering she had been taking calcium without vitamin K2 for years, Margaret dove into learning more about this little-known nutrient. At first, she was skeptical. Could a vitamin she had never heard of really make that much difference? But as she read the research and talked more with her daughter, the pieces began to fit together. Vitamin K2, she learned, doesn't work like calcium or even vitamin D. Its job isn't to build bone directly, but to guide calcium to the right places and keep it out of the wrong ones. It acts like a traffic cop for calcium, activating proteins that deposit it into bones while preventing it from collecting in arteries, kidneys, and joints. "That's what I've been missing," she told her daughter. "I haven't had a traffic cop." She also learned that K2 is found naturally in foods like natto, a fermented soybean dish common in Japan, aged cheeses, egg yolks, liver, and grass-fed butter. But many of these foods weren't part of her typical diet, and certainly not in high enough amounts to correct a long-term deficiency. With her doctor's approval, Margaret began taking a daily supplement that combined calcium, vitamin D3, and vitamin K2, specifically -7 Malawin quaches, the form shown to stay active longer in the body. Within 3 weeks, small changes began to emerge. She felt less stiff in the morning. Her knees didn't lock as much when she stood. Climbing stairs became less daunting, and she even began sleeping better, perhaps because the subtle discomfort that used to nag at her legs at night had eased. A follow-up visit with her doctor revealed stable kidney function and no further signs of calcium buildup. Her blood pressure, once edging upward, had leveled out. But what impressed her most wasn't just the numbers, it was how she felt. For the first time in years, she sensed that her body wasn't resisting her efforts. It was responding. And it all started with a shift from blindly taking calcium to understanding how to help calcium do its job, safely and effectively. It wasn't long before Margaret's story made its way into her weekly seniors walking group. On a bright Thursday morning, as she stretched with her usual circle of friends, someone mentioned knee stiffness. Another chimed in about feeling creaky, despite taking extra calcium daily. Margaret paused. For the first time, she felt compelled to speak up, not as a health expert, but as someone who had walked that same painful road. "Can I share something weird?" she asked. The women leaned in. She explained what had happened. How she'd spent years drinking milk religiously and taking calcium, believing it was helping her bones, only to discover that without vitamin K2, the calcium had been going to places it shouldn't. She told them how her daughter helped her uncover the missing piece, how K2 guided calcium into her bones instead of her joints and arteries, and how much better she felt after just a few weeks on the new routine. The group was stunned. "Wait. I've been taking calcium for over a decade," said Jean, 72. "Never heard of K2. Another woman pulled out her pill organizer. "I take vitamin D and calcium. That's enough, right?" Margaret shook her head gently. "I thought so too. But it's like having bricks and no builder. Without K2, your body might not know where to put the calcium." That morning's walk turned into a nutrition Q&A. People asked for brand names, dosages, even recipes for foods high in K2. One woman admitted she'd recently been diagnosed with arterial calcification, despite taking supplements faithfully. Her doctor had never mentioned K2. Margaret didn't preach. She simply encouraged everyone to talk with their doctor and get informed. By the following week, 3 of them had booked appointments. One had already switched to a K2 calcium combo. Margaret realized that what happened to her wasn't just a personal mistake. It was a widespread misunderstanding. Most of her generation had been told to drink milk and take calcium. But no one had explained the full equation. And now, with one conversation, she had planted seeds of change, not only in her own life but in a whole community of friends who, like her, just wanted to stay strong. What began as a personal health discovery quickly became something larger. Within a month, Margaret noticed changes, not just in herself, but in the people around her. Her walking group wasn't just chatting about books or the weather anymore. They were swapping notes on vitamin K2, sharing recipes with egg yolks and aged cheeses, and proudly comparing supplement labels. One member, Linda, had switched from calcium gummies to a full-spectrum K2D3 calcium formula and said her back pain had eased significantly. Another, Roger, mentioned that after years of borderline high blood pressure, his readings had stabilized for the first time in months. Even the group leader invited a local nutritionist to host a short seminar after their Saturday walk. Margaret was asked to introduce the topic. Nervous at first, she stood up with her note card and said simply, "I thought I was protecting my bones. Turns out, I was stiffening my arteries." That line stayed with people. What followed was a cascade of mini health breakthroughs. Several members got scans showing halted or reduced calcification. Others noticed better sleep, improved energy, and fewer cramps. But the most consistent feedback wasn't physical, it was emotional. people felt empowered. For years, they had followed conventional advice: drink milk, take calcium, and hope for the best. But now they understood the missing link, and it gave them a sense of control they hadn't felt in years. They were no longer just reacting to aging. They were actively shaping how they aged. Word spread beyond the walking group. At potlucks, someone would casually say, "Try this, it's rich in K2." Neighbors who never talked about health were suddenly comparing notes on soft cheeses versus natto. Even the local pharmacy began stocking more K2 options after a noticeable uptick in requests. Margaret watched it all with quiet pride. What began as a private scare, a creeping stiffness and confusion, had become a catalyst for knowledge and wellness. She didn't expect to become a voice in her community. But sometimes, one person's shift becomes a ripple. And in a world full of pills and promises, it turns out the real breakthrough came from understanding how the body truly works, and honoring it accordingly. 3 months after changing her routine, Margaret sat once again in her primary care physician's office, waiting for her follow-up results. This time, she felt different, less anxious, more curious. Her body had been speaking to her in subtle, encouraging ways. Now, she hoped the numbers would confirm what she already sensed. Dr. Patel entered the room holding her chart, eyebrows slightly raised. "You've been busy," he smiled. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Her blood pressure had dropped to a healthier range. Inflammatory markers were down. Even her kidney function, once slightly borderline, had improved. But what truly caught his attention was her bone scan. Compared to her previous test 6 months earlier, Margaret had experienced a measurable increase in bone mineral density, a rare feat for someone her age. "What changed?" he asked, genuinely curious. Margaret told him everything. How she had removed milk from her daily routine, stopped relying solely on calcium supplements, and began taking a K2 plus D3 plus calcium formula instead. How her daughter explained the science, how she read every label now, and how she'd started cooking with more whole foods that supported bone and heart health. Dr. Patel nodded. "I've been reading more about vitamin K2 lately. It's not yet mainstream in every practice, but it absolutely plays a role, especially in patients like you." He paused and added, "Most people your age are still drinking milk daily thinking it's enough. But without K2, that calcium doesn't always end up where we want it." Margaret grinned. "That's what I've been telling my walking group." The two laughed, but the moment felt weighty. For years, Margaret had followed conventional advice, assuming it was complete. Only now did she realize that health advice, especially for seniors, needs to evolve with new evidence. As she left the clinic, she felt lighter. Not just because her bones were stronger, but because she was no longer navigating her health in the dark. She had asked questions, challenged old habits, and taken ownership. For Margaret, this wasn't just a checkup. It was a checkpoint, a moment to confirm that listening to her body and updating her knowledge had truly changed her path forward. Margaret's transformation didn't end with stronger bones or better lab results. It began rippling through her family in ways she hadn't expected. At a Sunday brunch with her children and grandchildren, she casually mentioned her latest checkup. Her son David raised an eyebrow. "Wait, your bone density went up? At 67? I thought that was impossible." "It's not impossible," she replied, passing a plate of leafy greens. "It just took understanding what calcium actually needs to work." That afternoon, they sat together in the living room as Margaret explained everything she'd learned, how K2 helped guide calcium into bones and out of arteries, and why milk alone wasn't the miracle fix their generation had believed. Her daughter-in-law, who had been taking prenatal vitamins, looked surprised. "Nobody ever told me that," she said quietly. "I take calcium and D3, but I've never even heard of K2." Margaret smiled knowingly. "Neither had I, until it almost cost me my mobility." That moment sparked something bigger. Her children began asking more informed questions at their own doctor visits. Her teenage granddaughter, who was lactose intolerant, finally felt empowered to look beyond milk for bone health without guilt or confusion. Even her husband, who resisted supplements for years, agreed to try a K2 complex after reading a few studies she printed out. What Margaret had learned was no longer just helping her. It was rewriting the family's approach to aging, health, and prevention. She started keeping a small folder labeled K2 and Bone Wisdom, with articles, dosage notes, and food suggestions. Anytime a neighbor, friend, or family member asked about supplements or joint pain, she pulled it out like a trusted recipe book. Her role had shifted, from silent consumer of generic health advice to a bridge between generations, someone who had lived through the confusion and found clarity. She knew aging came with challenges. But she also knew that aging, when paired with the right knowledge, could be powerful. Margaret had once believed that milk was enough. Now, she believed in education, personalization, and asking better questions, not just for herself, but for every life she touched. Because strong bones weren't just about what you drink. They were about what you understand. When older adults consume high amounts of calcium, especially from milk or supplements, without enough vitamin K2, that calcium can end up in the wrong places. Instead of strengthening bones, it may deposit in arteries, kidneys, or joints, leading to dangerous conditions like arterial calcification, kidney stones, and chronic joint pain. These issues often develop silently over time, making them harder to detect until serious damage has occurred. Relying solely on calcium without K2 isn't just ineffective, it can be harmful. For those over 60, balancing calcium with vitamin K2 is essential to protect long-term mobility, heart health, and overall well-being. Calcium is crucial for aging bones, but only if it reaches the right destination, explains Dr. Grace Mitchell. That's where vitamin K2 comes in. According to Dr. Mitchell, seniors should not rely solely on milk or calcium supplements. Instead, they should aim for a combination that includes vitamin K2, especially the -7 Malawin-Quatches form, and vitamin D3. This trio works together. D3 improves calcium absorption, while K2 ensures calcium is deposited into bones, not into arteries or soft tissues. She recommends getting your vitamin levels checked and choosing supplements that are clearly labeled with proper ratios. Natural sources like natto, egg yolks, and aged cheese can help, but for many older adults, a supplement is the most practical option. Bone health isn't just about adding calcium, she says. It's about guiding it. When calcium goes where it's needed, everything from your mobility to your heart health benefits. Always consult your doctor before changing supplements, especially if you're managing other conditions. If this story changed the way you think about bone health, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone over 60 who still believes milk is enough. Leave a comment below with your experience, questions, or tips on managing calcium and K2. Your insight might help someone avoid years of silent damage. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories, expert advice from Dr. Grace Mitchell, and smarter strategies for senior wellness. Together, we can shift the conversation from outdated advice to truly effective aging solutions, one informed decision at a time.